What's going on, guys? Zane here with Everything Vive. Welcome back for another episode. I'm here with Ronnie. Ronnie, how's it going, man?
It's going great. How are you doing?
Doing fantastic. Had a nice weekend getaway, and now back to the cold in Chicago, unfortunately.
Oh man, yeah, it's so cold here. It's terrible.
Well, it's a good reason to stay inside, play some games, get to know your Vive very well. So hopefully people have a reason to do that if they're in cold weather.
Yep.
But we have our news episode today coming to you on Tuesday. Again, was out of town yesterday, so left that notice for you guys on our Game Talk episode. And here we are, a brand new week. Got some major items that we'll be discussing. And yeah, what do you say, Ronnie? Let's jump right in.
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Well, first one, let's just cut right to the chase. Vive Studios was announced, I believe, at the end of last week. And for those unfamiliar, this is probably going to be something similar to what Oculus has going on with Oculus Studios. It is going to be releasing first-party titles. They have dozens, and that's a quote, dozens of releases expected for 2017. So that's actually very exciting. And the first release just came out. It's called Arcade Saga. I haven't had a chance to try it yet, but I did see some positive reviews on Steam. So looking forward to getting that. But what are your thoughts, Ronnie?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good thing for sure. I mean, there's in general with the VR community, there's been a lot of back and forth as to, whether exclusives are healthy or not healthy for VR in general and all of that talk. But I mean, considering Oculus has their own first party titles coming out, I think it's only natural that the Vive should also develop something similar. And just in general, regardless of what gaming platform that you may or may not have experienced over the years, all other platforms generally in the gaming business have had first party development. And a lot of that has spurred on or funded some of the biggest franchises in gaming. I mean, you look to Sony with the Uncharted series. Those are, while they're not first party titles, they're exclusive to the Sony platform. You have lots of first party titles with Microsoft. Halo, Forza, Gears of War was a first. Again, I guess that was technically not a first party, but for all intents and purposes, it kind of was because it was funded by Microsoft quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But in general, all of these consoles, you look at Nintendo and their success over the years, those are all first party titles. And the stuff that...
Hold on, just one quick second. Before we go into it, I know that I've learned this stuff recently when talking with you and like just understanding the gaming industry, I guess, better overall, but for maybe people who don't have a gaming background, can you describe or at least explain the differences between first party and third party titles and things like that?
Sure. It's really easy. Basically, I mean, technically there are some in-betweeners, I guess, in there, but in general, you have first and third party development teams. And basically, third party development in gaming is usually done by is always done. It's done by outside companies, and it's a standalone company that develops a game, and then they decide or work with the various platforms out there to try to bring their titles to those platforms. So they own the titles completely outright on their own, and then they find a way to get them onto each of the platforms. First party titles, on the other hand, or first party development teams, developers are companies that are, or teams rather, that are owned by the platform itself, typically. So whereas an Electronic Arts is a third party because they're a separate company from the Microsoft, Sony's, Nintendo's, Valve or Steam, and all Oculus and Vives of the world. They're completely separate from that, but then they have their own development teams and they develop titles for all these different platforms. There are other development teams that are actually owned and managed by those actual companies, the platform holders. So Microsoft has a number of teams, of development teams that they completely own and manage on their own. and those teams are dedicated to only making games for that platform. And
Now,
so, yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
no, I was going to say this, and some of the benefits for that is one, the control, but also the funding that goes into it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if basically, I mean, those games are being made in order to promote that platform. So assuming it's a franchise that the platform holders have an interest in, think they'll make a lot of money. Maybe they'll add variety to the types of games on that platform, etc. It gives those games, those development teams a stability in a sense, and like I said, it also so not only do they have the resources, but they have direct connections with those companies. They have more development resources at their disposal. They're also focused on only one platform, so they can really bring home the strengths of those platforms, either in terms of just the technical capabilities, or if it's a VR system, for example, they can really just focus only on that type of controller, that type of setup, and really get that last bit of polish and performance out of it. So there are definitely benefits to only developing a game for one platform, and then also to have the funds and the backing of that platform and the platform holders, above all else. So those are some of the benefits, and of course the downsides are, with limited teams out there working on VR titles, and the limited user base that we have out there right now, the more you develop software for only one system. If you're on the other side of the fence and you have a different headset, you're not able to play those games most likely, and it kind of fractures the community a little bit more, and prevents some of that build up and camaraderie between everybody. So it continues to fracture the community. So those are some downsides to it, and obviously on the Vive side, most of that discussion has been pro open VR, open platforms, and Oculus has been more about the curated, storefront and kind of the small. But you kind of had a feeling that HTC was going to move in this direction when they launched Viveport, and when they were starting to put more and more resources behind the software development side of things. Because and I think this is where you'll see kind of a shift a little bit between what HTC will be doing with the Vive versus Valve and its support of just Steam VR more generally speaking. Is we've had that year or so where the HTC Vive could really come into its own, and while there's always going to be that huge Steam support, obviously, since it was co-developed by both of them, HTC probably wants to make the Vive a bigger and bigger product, and at the same time, Steam and Valve are going to want to not only support the Vive, but also, potentially support other manufacturers out there in the future that'll bring out their own headsets, including the Oculus. To some extent. So, but yeah. So as far as some of the funding for VR development is difficult. It's expensive, and right now, a lot of these titles aren't making a whole lot of money. So it kind of makes sense for developers if they can potentially work on games under a first party. I would think that would be a great opportunity for a lot of folks that have
agreed.
experience in the and who knows? I don't know the full extent of whether Vive is or HTC and Vive are still looking for new developers. I'm sure they are. I'm sure they already have a team in place as well, since they have already announced.
There's the Vive Accelerator program as well. So this is kind of the second effort that HTC is putting out there, which is good, because this is, I think, more focused on games. But sorry, go ahead, continue.
No, I agree with that. So this is more focused on games, but they'll also kind of have. I'll be curious to see kind of what the quality of the titles are that come out. You'd expect them to really go all out and try to increase the quality or really, like, especially these first titles, really prove to people what the benefits are of them having first party publishing. So
Yeah, I mean, one of the sound bites that came out of it was they wanted to have, deeper gaming experiences or just deeper experiences overall. I guess
yeah.
it was gaming centric. Just with the idea that a lot of people are critical when it comes to a lot of the Vive games that are out there, saying that they're really just tech demos. Which I'm not going to comment on either way. I think the technology is cool. I think you have really, really awesome people that are coming out with some fantastic stuff, and this is only the beginning. So it's tough to like judge them by end products in other platforms, if that makes sense. Like this is developing at a very, very current and present pace, and so it's just we have to see kind of where things go and look back maybe in a couple of years and make an evaluation then, instead of saying like, hey, you know what, right now all we're getting is this. Well, yeah, all we're getting is this because people are still getting into it. People are still learning how to maximize the features of the different VR platforms. And just going back to, I think, one of the conversations we had previously where we were talking about what this cross functionality will do and maybe some of the negatives that could come from it, which was room scale kind of being minimized because developers are trying to create experiences that go for both both main platforms right now, being Oculus and HTC Vive. But what this does, or at least what this gives me confidence in the idea that HTC, I mean, they do room scale tracking fantastically well. That's one of their greatest strengths. And when people compare the two platforms, the two hardware sets, I mean, that's, it's night and day between those on that front. And I'm just speaking on that front. I'm not trying to start something there.
I think it's,
they'll be able to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, no, you're totally right on that. And I think more and more information has came out on, the room scale capabilities of the Oculus and the touch setup with multiple and it's clear that the experience is not as great as what the HTC Vive room scale setup is out of the box. So and I totally agree. Those dangers of kind of steering away from that, first party focused titles for the Vive could potentially solve that problem because they're probably double down.
Yeah, they're going to maximize what they do best. And right now that's a room scale. I mean, that's the biggest difference. And so when you have, people sitting down in their meetings and their think tanks, I've got to believe that, hey, we do room scale much better than any other platform out there. How do we make it so that, room scale is the only experience to go? At least that would be my hope. And
I think that's right. No, I think that's a really great point. And I think that's a huge advantage here is, if developers were going to kind of split the difference and kind of, a first party HTC Vive focused team would be able to really maximize what a gaming experience will be like in room scale. And I wonder if, part of their thinking along these lines in creating first party development up to this point, I mean, you couldn't do really room scale with an Oculus unless you had a pre-release touch or something like that with extra sensors. If you had an Oculus, you weren't able to do any type of room scale or motion-based tracking experiences. And so the Vive really didn't have to do a whole lot to make sure that its games were going to stand out from what Oculus was releasing with the Rift. And now that the Rift is able to do at least some of that, I agree. Now it's time for HTC and the people working on Vive titles to really go out there and show why the tracking system on the Vive is still very superior to what's out there in most Oculus setups. I mean, I think that's because I think if you do the math and you look at what both of them are actually physically capable of with the tracking, I mean, the Vive is a better. I've heard quite a bit about you not really being able to have full motion with a lot of the Vive. I mean, with a lot of the Oculus tracking, for example, not being able to go prone because your sensor doesn't see you on the floor, or just in general, the limitations that are involved with most of the setups that you're able to do with the cameras.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would think that this is HTC's chance to really show why lighthouse tracking and why all of that is a better fit.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, we're not we're not even going to debate that, just because I think it's been documented enough out there in terms of the tracking systems between both. But like I was saying earlier, I think ultimately what it's going to come down to is the fact that HTC is going to be able to provide stuff that maximizes their hardware, or Vive Studios is going to be able to maximize stuff that I'm sorry, Vive will be able to maximize their hardware in the most efficient way possible. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, and I think you had been telling me that, I mean, they announced their first title, right?
Yeah, Arcade Saga. So I'm going to make sure I grab that, and maybe we can talk about it on an upcoming Game Talk as well.
Yeah, no, and I will say the first party titles that I've tried on the Oculus, especially when I got a chance to play some of those sports titles with the Touch when I was at Best Buy previously. I mean, they were really slick and they were really well done, and I'd love to see titles that are slick and polished like that come out of a Vive Studios. So yeah, I'm excited, and we'll have to wait and see. And in general, it's just nice to know that these companies aren't shying away from really doubling down on what they're doing.
Yeah, agreed. And give it up for HTC or the Vive's PR team to, of course, make that announcement the same week the Touch comes out, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, speaking of well-polished titles, we're just going to touch on this real quick. For anyone listening that is still considering getting a Vive, there is now a new deal out there and a new incentive for you guys. If you buy a NVIDIA graphics card with a Vive, right now I think the deal is that you get Serious Sam, Raw Data, and Sports Bar VR. So I would say some of the most or more polished titles out there. But what are your thoughts on that, Ronnie? Real quick.
I think it's great. I mean, all of those titles that you mentioned are going to impress people and going to, give people a great first experience with the Vive. It's funny that Raw Data and Serious Sam to some extent are both kind of similar titles. So I would have liked to see them branch out to, not just wave-based shooters and the like, but still, those are games that I think everyone will enjoy. And the fact that they're doing the bundle where if you buy an NVIDIA product, and the Vive, you get those. I think a lot of people out there are already going to be doing that anyways. So essentially, if unless you already had a PC capable enough of running a VR system, for a lot of new people that are getting into VR, I think this is great because they'd probably be getting a lot of the same type of hardware anyways, and now they're just going to get additional free games to complement those that are already coming with the Vive itself. So.
Yeah, agreed. Well, I mean, most of the people I think listening are Vive owners already, so this is just a quick PSA for those who are still on the fence. Make sure you grab it and get these awesome games. I mean, you'll also get the games that come with the Vive, so there will be other experiences there.
Yep.
But we have two more items. We're going to shift away from Vive-centric news right now and go to, I guess, just from the VR world. And we'll just touch on these points because there's still a lot in development and a lot of details that we don't have yet that aren't available. But I just wanted to make sure that we mention them because they do seem like they will be pretty big in the coming weeks, months, and potentially years. The first one is Oculus. The CEO, and I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but Brendan Iribe stepped down, and I hope I said his last name correctly. And he will be heading up the PC division. And I know this has created waves on the Reddit forums, but what are your quick thoughts on it, Ronnie?
Yeah, just my quick thoughts. I don't necessarily think it's, all doom and gloom for Oculus, like some of the people are trying to make it seem on the Reddit. But I do think it's a big development. Basically, it sounds like Oculus is going through a major restructuring, and they're basically separating out the mobile side of the VR platform that they're running from the PC side. And so, I mean, I think it's potentially a positive thing. I think that, focusing on PC VR separately from mobile VR has a lot of benefits. And in a lot of ways, I think the company was already kind of doing that anyways. There are, long term, one could argue that Facebook and Oculus might be more incentivized to focus on the mobile side, since that's going to be kind of the larger market, versus the higher end, PC side of things. So that could potentially be a downside, but I don't think that they have any intentions of abandoning one or the other. I really think this is just a way to kind of double down on each, and rightfully so recognize that the challenges on one side of the platform, while it's going to help the other side, might not necessarily always be in sync. So I think it makes sense, and I'm not, honestly, I'm not surprised. I kind of already assumed that they were kind of on separate tracks to some extent. You look at what's being done, with the Samsung Gear and all of that, and this is, I think if anything, this is probably coming from the fact that Oculus had already announced some, they were kind of making that middle ground territory with their wireless version of the Oculus, kind of, that new headset that they were developing that looked like it was almost like a hybrid between the Rift and a Samsung Gear VR. I think this is Oculus recognizing the importance of kind of having both, and internally kind of, having their own hardware, their own guys work on a mobile platform in addition to what was being done with, the Samsung Gear stuff before.
Yeah.
And then still keeping up with the PC stuff, just, with separate teams. So I'll be interested. Like you said, it's early now. It was just a brief announcement. We don't have a lot of details on it yet. I would be interested to see kind of what those breakdowns look like, and where some of the bigwigs at Oculus are going to be focusing their time. I mean, I know like John Carmack's a big one. I think it sounded like he was kind of, working quite a bit on the mobile side also, because he did talk about mobile VR stuff quite a bit at the last Oculus Connect. But I mean, yeah, I think this is just kind of a wait and see thing. We'll keep a look at and kind of how both sides of the company are going in the future, and it's interesting nonetheless. So.
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't think anybody's going to disagree with you on that in terms of the diverging different VR platforms that they have. I think people may have been more so just wondering why have him step down? Like, is there trouble in the Oculus camp? Because I'm not going to say it's easy to promote someone to a position, but when somebody steps down, there's usually a reason for it, and usually not a good one unless it's retirement or something. But
yeah,
you know what I mean? So I think people are just kind of getting a little wary about what this means. Like, did Oculus not live up to certain expectations, whatever, XYZ might be. But no reason for us to speculate. I think that's just kind of where the sentiment is, or at least why people are, discussing this as much as they have on the forum so far.
Yeah, no, we'll see.
Yep. All right. Well, a last point for today, last news point, and you actually brought this to my attention very, very recently, or at least, yeah. Well, yeah. The Khronos Group announced new standard collaboration for VR integration. So I don't know if you want to dive into this, because it sounds really, really cool.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know a lot of the details, and honestly, I don't think a lot of the details have been announced or even really worked out yet. But the Khronos Group is basically a collaboration of various companies in the industry, not just the VR industry, but the gaming and electronics, industry as a whole, the tech industry, I should say. You have everyone from Google to Valve to Oculus to Microsoft to the list goes on and on. I'm pretty sure Microsoft is on that list. But anyways, I mean, it's basically all of the major names in the tech industry, and they're a part of this group. And the group essentially has, been the driving force behind a lot of open APIs and different software languages for video game development and other developments. And one of the big ones has been Vulkan as of late. OpenGL, all of these underlying APIs that developers can use to really bridge the gap in programming, between different types of hardware and whatnot, and in an open environment. And they recently announced that they're going to be focusing on creating an open API for VR. And like I said, Valve and Oculus are just and Google are just three of the many companies that are signed onto this initiative. So I think what people are really hopeful about is if it can catch on, it'll be a way to develop a VR specific writing language, potentially an API that will allow developers to take advantage of some of the higher functionalities and efficiencies for VR. So it should make developing titles in VR and getting to the hardware that NVIDIA and potentially AMD will be releasing that is more focused on VR. Hopefully, it'll lead to some of those capabilities being easier to develop for. So I hope that makes sense. I'm not a developer myself, so I feel like some of it may have been a little bit, not 100% correct, but the bottom line is open API for VR. All of the major platforms seem like they're going to be working with it, and so I think it offers a ton of potential and hopefully increased performance and better VR experiences overall once it eventually catches on. So I don't think it's a short-term thing. I think it's a long-term thing. I would imagine that this is going to take months, if not years, to come up with something that is finally worked into a product. I know Vulkan, for example, is barely in a few products now, and it's we've been hearing about that for forever. So it's more of a long-term thing, but regardless, it's just nice to see that everyone is interested in playing together. So
yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think at some point in every major industry, you see that this type of standardization, and I think that's only going to help things as it goes along. And so for VR, it is good to see all the major players kind of stepping in and trying to see where this takes it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So it's all of these news items are pretty exciting, and I think I think in general things are leading in the right direction. I mean, it's interesting to see these open initiatives while at the same time you see individual companies doubling down, creating first-party development teams and whatnot. I think in general, regardless of what direction everything leads, it looks like everything's pointing in the correct direction, which is that VR is here to stay, and it's only going to get bigger and better. And yeah, it's like always, it's exciting times. It's the best time to be messing around with VR, I would say.
Well, that's a good note to end on. So we'll wrap things up there. I think that's all I got. You too?
Yeah, I think that's it. So
cool. Well, thank you all for tuning in for another Vive VR news episode. We will have another interview for you guys tomorrow, Wednesday, our usual interview episode day, followed by Game Talk later this Friday. So have a fantastic week, and we will talk to you guys again very, very soon. Take care.